This is Politics with Avi. Hey everybody, I'm Avi. I would like to start off with, of course, mentioning the importance of taking measures against the coronavirus. The situation is very serious. Currently, the United States is leading with the death toll, then is Italy, then is Spain, and many other countries have fallen victim to the current situation. So, wear gloves, wear masks, disinfect, wash your hands very often. Make sure when you enter back into your home or office, you either aerosol spray yourself with disinfectant, or you make sure the clothes you were wearing are kept somewhere further away from your other clothing and areas because they might be carrying the virus. On another note, I would like to update everybody on my personal life. I have been very involved with government projects having to do with preventing falsifications of history um, with different governments of countries. Most recently, I worked with Russia as well. I've been involved highly with my project with, excuse me, with the Women in International Security. We do various things such as discuss the topic of women equality, gender equality, the role of women in society, and so on and so forth. So I try to do my best to represent and ask questions where possible, generally be an active member of society as a woman, and is somebody who's knowledgeable of the inability for women always to be perceived as equal to men and actually even to other women too. Um, so regarding everything else, I don't think I have enough time to discuss it. So this is what I wanted to share about myself for now. About the lesson that I promised, while I was doing my practical um, period of teaching, I actually got to discuss with not only students but colleagues as well a means to actually find information that would be valuable for people, how I would do it, and what actually interests students the most. What we came to a conclusion was that you could have a perfect lecture, you could make a perfect seminar, but students will only remember 40% of what you teach them. So basically, what you need to provide them with is a synthesis of the most important things clustered in about one page, let's say. So I have found publicly available information, a text which is actually about 3 pages. No, yeah, it's 3 pages, and it perfectly explains everything about politics. Generally, people who haven't studied politics before have no idea what it is as a subject, and therefore, I think this, what I will be reading to you, will be very helpful. I read it because I do not want to deviate from the specific information, since a lot of examinations are based on specific information and not generally all of history and everything else. This information that I found, it is based on the um, Russian examinations, which are actually um, very much of quality, and would be helpful for anybody else as well. This is bachelor's level entry exams. So to start with, the origin and nature of politics, its essence and structure. The concept of political science is formed from two Greek words, politics, state public affairs, and logos, word, thought, teaching. The father of the first concept is Aristotle, the second is Heraclitus. The combination of these two concepts means that political science is a teaching, the science of politics. The term politics was introduced into scientific use by Aristotle in the 4th century before Christ. The Greek philosopher defined it as the art of state management, which was understood as the polis. However, the separation of politics into a special sphere of public life occurred long before the Greeks began to actively use this concept. Although politics originated several thousand years ago, it is formed much later than economic and social relations as well as morality. What was the genesis of politics? The history of political thought gives various answers to this question. The first idea of the nature of politics was theological, explaining the origin of it as in the whole of human life from the divine will. Another common approach is the anthropological interpretation that justifies the need for politics by the nature of man. Thus, the definition of man as a political being expressed by Aristotle emphasizes that political communication corresponds to the nature of man and his desire for the good. Outside of politics, he is either an animal or a deity, for animal and God do not need laws and rights. The initial form of political communication were the family and the village, and the highest form was the state. The policy was allowed to, the policy has allowed people to curb their own selfish animal nature and to realize the common good and justice. A close thought in the 17th century was expressed by the English thinker Thomas Hobbes, who interpreted human nature as selfish and greedy, which generates a war of all against all in society. The instinct of self-preservation and natural reasons prompts people to create such a political institution as the state. Thus, politics is formed by the elevation of man above his own animal state, and politics itself transforms the animal into a man. Hobbes proceeded from the biological nature of man, extending to it the properties of living nature. The recognition of common human and animal principles, common instincts, behavioral patterns, is at the heart of modern biological interpretations of the nature of politics. Thus, according to the ideas of the Austrian ethologist K. Lawrence, man, like any animal, is characterized by aggression and the instinct to fight for survival, while in contrast to more dangerous animals, less dangerous creatures, people have a weaker restraining aggressiveness beginning. It was aggression that Lawrence attributed to numerous wars, conflicts, and revolutions, although he considered it possible to weaken it and limit its manifestation in open form through control. Biological interpretation of the origin of politics sometimes have much in common with the psychological explanation of political processes. The essence of this approach is that human nature has needs, interests, emotions, and drives. They give rise to political interaction. The original theory of the transition of society from a pre-social to a social, including political state, was developed by Sigmund Freud. He assumed that politics is a manifestation of the libidinal energy of individuals. Thus, the state and law act as substitutes for the once existing progenitor father who was killed by sons who rebel against the father's monopoly on sexual pleasure. Thus, the nature of power in politics is rooted in the unconscious, in the libidinal complex, and the sense of guilt. Freud believed that the attitudes of people to leaders and the state shows the childish longing of an adult for a once existing father. To them, the individual will experience the opposite feelings at the same time demand protection, paternalism, and hate, criticism, and discontent with the government. Excuse me. I have actually translated all of this from Russian into English, so I am having a little bit of an issue with the text since I did it Russian with English together. But anyway, according to the social interpretation, politics has a social origin. origin. In particular, the approach that considers its formation in the course of the historical evolution of society as a result of the growth of its social heterogeneity and complexity of the organization has been widely justified. Primitive society was socially homogeneous. There were no political institutions, organizations, and there was no politics, although there was power exercised by all adult members of the gens. The complexity of society as it develops, the emergence of conflict interests in it led to the emergence of the state, and with it, politics. Politics arises as the activity of organizing the joint life of people in a socially heterogeneous society, along with the division of people into managers and managed, rich and poor. Social changes were derived from the Neolithic Revolution, which changed all forms of economy and the way of life of people. With the Neolithic Revolution, historians associate the appearance of metal tools, the transition from the appropriating type of economy, hunting and gathering, to the producing, agriculture, cattle breeding, to a settled way of life, the appearance of cities. This eventually led to changes in power relations. So, the essence of the policy, although the essence of politics has been studied in science for more than 2,000 years, the question of what politics is remains open. There are different understandings of the policy. One, historically, the first definition of politics is the management of society is relevant in modern political science. Politics is interpreted as the activity of managing any social processes in terms of content. This activity appears as a solution to all problems except for moral ones. The Easton and G. Almond as an authoritarian distribution of values, the Easton as a way to regulate conflicts. Two, the substantial approach, pointing to the essence of the policy, emphasizes its direct connection with power. Politics is either governing with the use of power or fighting to gain and retain power. Power interpretations are presented in the works of Niccolo Machiavelli, M. Weber, K. Marx in American Political Science. M. Weber, for example, defines politics as the desire to participate in power or influence the distribution of power, whether between the state, whether within the state, between groups of people that it includes. Three, the institutional approach focuses on the organization in which power materializes. In some interpretation, politics is participation in the affairs of the state, the use of the state power by classes to achieve their goals. Lenin. But politics is not only carried out by the state. So other definitions point to a variety of institutions and organizations that can act as subjects of politics. Four, the sociological approach is related to the consideration of society as a structure consisting of various groups with their own interests and needs, the main lever of which is the power. Politics in this case is considered as the relations, directions, and ways of activity of social groups of defending their interests and satisfying their needs through various means, amongst which the main role is played by the power. This is the policy definition that we will use as a working one in the future. Five, the teleological approach interprets politics as a specific form of human existence associated with an attainment and organization. This interpretation extends the boundaries of politics since there is a goal. Just a moment. Since there is a goal, attainment, and organization. Oh no. Since there is a goal set in any field of activity, then politics can be found, as supporters to this approach do, in a wide variety of relationships, for example, between spouses in the relationship of a teacher and a student. Such different definitions of politics solve the question of the significance of politics and the life of society in different ways. 6. According to the consensus approach, politics is the sphere of uniting all members of society. when social problems are resolved by nonviolent means through the search for compromises without winners and losers. Politics will be understood as activities aimed at achieving citizens' consent executively by peaceful and nonviolent means. 7. The conflict approach considers politics as a sphere of struggle in which the strongest wins, as the domination of some over others. Politics is interpreted as a field of conflict, of interest of social groups and institutions over power, over control, over the mechanism of distribution of public goods. When considering the manifestation of politics, it is necessary to recognize the inadmissibility of absolutization of any of the approaches. There are two principles in politics. The first principle is related to the fact that society constantly reproduces social inequality since most public goods are scarce. This creates contradictions and competition among social group among social groups for the acquisition of sources of goods, widely known as the interpretation of the essence of politics as a mechanism for the distribution of values in society, which was justified by Laswell. He defined politics as the process of determining who gets what, then, and how. This understanding of politics explains the desire of individuals and social groups for state power. It is the possession of power that allows us to create conditions, for example, the adoption of laws, the establishment of a certain level of taxes, social programs that ensure the functioning and appropriation of values by certain social groups. Thus, politics is a conflict of interest. The second beginning of politics is seen in the research for unintegrating dominant, without which society would collapse. This shows the need to limit the influence of randomness and unpredictability of society and on society. Therefore, politics is a search for balance and compromise. Structure. The policy The policy has a complex multidimensional structure. The policy can be considered at the level of its subjects. The subjects of politics are various social groups, classes, ethics, and religious communities, etc. States, parties, international organizations, etc. Note that political actors are defined as participants in political processes who are able to act freely and independently. The latter means that they are aware of their position in society and try to realize their interests and goals through the power, primarily state power. The political science, the concept of actor, is used to denote the subject of politics, having a touch of theatricality. It quite accurately characterizes a participant in political life as a carrier of a certain role functions. These roles in the political process are not equivalent. For example, the role of an ordinary voter and the role of a representative of the ruling elite. The activity of a political actor can be represented at the individual, group, and institutional levels. One of the most well-known typologists focuses on three levels of policy actors: social, individuals, classes, elites, ethnic groups, the mafia, the crowd in a crisis. In the absence of an organized political force, ochlocracy can be established, for example, the power of the crowd, corporate groups, a certain financial and industrial business elites, etc. Institutional, parties, state authorities, public organizations, etc. The policy is also represented by such super institutions as the nation state, the UN, and NATO. Functional, the army acting as a part of the state often takes power itself, establishing a military regime of government. Intelligence agencies, lobbies, opposition, bureaucracy. Bureaucracy can also be attributed to the social level. Bureaucracy is a social group designed to make the management effective, functional aspects, but it often uses the knowledge of management mechanisms and the powers granted to it in its own interests and is able to concentrate power in its own hands. The bureaucracy is a subject of policy because it is entrusted with the function of implementing any state management decisions, so it is able to block the implementation of any of them. It contradicts as itself. The object of politics can the object of politics, sorry, are social phenomena that are targeted by the activities of political subjects, in particular power. Subjects carrying out political activities enter into political relations, international relations interactions about the use of power. These interactions will be determined by the political interests of the participants, who are the direct motivators of political activity. They are formed from the awareness of economic, social, religious, ethic interests, awareness of their position based on comparison with the in comparison with the situation of other groups, and assume an orientation to participate in political and managerial activities as a condition for fixing or changing disposition. The nature of political activity and relations is also determined by value, orientations, ideals, and very often emotions. For example, political consciousness. At the level of rational understanding, political consciousness acts as an ideology, and at the level of emotions, experiences, and feelings, as political psychology. Finally, from the mid-50s of the 20th century, social scientists began to identify a special phenomenon, although having much in common with political consciousness, but still not completely reducible to it, political culture. In the structure of politics, one can distinguish the normative aspect of represented the normative aspect represented by constitutions, laws, and program documents of parties and political movements. The presented elements of political life can be combined into more general types of phenomena. The political system, political regimes. Some political scientists consider the political regime as a functioning subsystem of the political system, and political processes. The political system includes a relatively stable class of phenomena, institutions, relations, political culture, etc., and characterizes the structure of political power in society. The political regime reveals the functional and dynamic aspects of the political system. Political processes include relatively more volatile phenomena. The political process is the interaction of political actors, which results in changes in the political life of society. So this is it for now. Do expect another lesson quite soon. I will get down to translating it properly. Hopefully this time I'll have less mistakes in the text before I begin to present it here. We'll read it out. And I hope this was both educational enough and a sample of the type of exchange of know-how countries could have between each other that could contribute to peaceful relations as well. Thank you very much for joining Politics with Avi. This was Avi. I am Avi. All the best. Take care and keep safe. Stay home.